Hi everyone, welcome to Meditation Stories, and today's session is all about identity and identification. So firstly, we'll explore a mythological story, and then we'll see what does it have to do with the concept of identification and what is identification, and lastly, we'll explore a little bit with our own identity. Okay, let's get started. So, the story I'm going to tell you today is the story of King Midas, and no, it's not the story of his golden touch, it's what happens after that. So, for those of you who don't know, King Midas was granted a wish by a god, and he wished that everything he touches turns to gold, which turned out to be a pretty bad decision because he turned his own daughter into gold, and then he had to plead and beg for the wish to be revoked. On the back of this bad decision, King Midas was feeling pretty tired and he decided that he needed to go into the mountains for a break. So King Midas goes into the mountains for a break and he's relaxing and feeling good, and he comes across this god called Pan. So Pan is a god who plays the pipes and he plays them beautifully, and King Midas falls in love with his music and he gathers a lot of attention. A lot of people come to see Pan, so much so that even the gods start to take notice. And there is one god who's not altogether happy about this, and he is god Apollo, the god of music and art. And he decides to come down to earth and see for himself what all the fuss is about. And he comes down and he says, you know what, I want a competition. Pan and me will play our music, and the mountain god Tolus will decide who is the winner. So they both agree, and the day is set, and lots of people come to see this competition, and Tolus is ready. It's Pan's turn to play first, and King Midas can't wait. He goes and sits right in front, right next to Pan while he plays his music, and the crowd loves it. They sway and hum, and at the end they cheer very loudly. Then it's Apollo's turn, and Apollo starts playing his lyre, and the notes are heavenly. People are mesmerized, and it is evident who the winner is, and Tolus declares at the end of this competition that Apollo has won. Everybody is fine with this decision, everybody except King Midas. And King Midas gets really angry. He runs up to Apollo and he says, "Your music is not fit for human ears." And Apollo is shocked. He does not expect this, and he says, "If you can't appreciate my music, then you must have the ears of a donkey." And suddenly King Midas grows two large donkey's ears. He says, "I can't be king like this, everybody will make fun of me." And from that day on, he starts wearing a huge hat to cover his donkey's ears. Not a soul knows the secret of King Midas. Not a soul except King Midas's barber. So King Midas has hair like everybody else, and it starts to get pretty wild under his hat, and his barber is required. So King Midas's barber is sworn to secrecy, and he can't tell anyone about what he sees. And his barber, likes King Midas a lot, as King Midas is generally known to be a good king, and he don't want to harm him in any way, and he keeps the secret for several years, but slowly it builds up. It builds up and he has to share it with someone. So what does he do? He goes far away into some field. He digs a hole into the ground and he whispers into that hole, "King Midas has donkey's ears." And then he covers the hole up and he feels a lot better. He feels a sigh of relief and he goes away. Several reeds grow out of the place where he had dug the hole. And every time the breeze blows, the reeds whisper, "King Midas has donkey's ears. King Midas has donkey's ears." And soon the whole kingdom comes to know about King Midas and his donkey's ears. And he is mortified. So when I tell this story to my kids, they say that they don't like the ending at all because King Midas is forced to rush out of his kingdom. They say that King Midas's subjects loved him anyway, with or without the donkey. So what does King Midas's story have to do with the concept of identity and identification? So basically, the word identity is defined by the Cambridge Dictionary as the act of recognizing and naming someone or something. And an excerpt from the New Earth explains identification like this: The word identification is derived from the Latin word idem, meaning same, and facere, which means to make. So, in King Midas's story, King Midas identified so deeply with Pan and his music that when Pan failed or lost the competition, he took it more personally than Pan himself. People tend to identify with various things, people, organizations, groups, beliefs. I can identify with my gender, I can identify with the concept of veganism, etc. And the list goes on and on. But why do we identify with things? We identify because we feel a sense of belonging, we feel a sense of safety, and it enhances our self image too. So, in this experiment, we're not really going to be going into whether identification is a good thing or bad thing, but rather we're going to grow an awareness around something that we are already identified with. So, before we get started with our experiment, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like this video. So let's get started. For the purposes of our experiment, I would like you to pick any one thing that you feel like you're moderately identified with. You can pick a hobby, you can pick a sports team that you like, you can pick a sports personality that you like. Something that if you were to measure the intensity of this identification, you would choose at approximately a 5 on 10. So just take a few moments. You can close your eyes if that feels comfortable and just try to observe any one thing that you are moderately identified with. We're trying not to pick something that we're strongly identified with because we're just playing with the concept. So I know that I'm identified with something when, for example, if I choose Manchester United as something I'm identified with, hypothetically, because I'm not at all identified with Manchester United, and if somebody says that they are the worst team in the world and I feel certain feelings like anger, frustration, or alternatively, if somebody says they're the best team in the world and I feel a sense of pride and joy. So just observe if it gives you certain feelings when somebody says these things about your identification, then you know you are identified. Just take a few moments and bring this thing into your mind. We will be doing this experiment in 3 parts. Okay, so for the first part of this experiment, I want you to think of the thing that you're identified with and think of all the good things about it. So, for example, if I choose the team Manchester United, then I think of all their amazing players. I think about how I like the colors of their jersey. I think about all the good decisions the team has made, all the goals the team has made, etc. Just think about the thing that you are identified with and all the good things about it. Just notice also the level of your intensity. Are you about a 4 on 10, 5 on 10, 6 on 10? How strongly are you identified with this thing? Now return your attention to your breathing and take a few breaths, maybe 3. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Now for part 2, imagine that everyone in the whole world is also identified with exactly the same thing. So for example, if I'm identified with Manchester United, I assume that the whole world is also a fan of Manchester United. Every single person on this planet is part of the same identification. Just observe that. What feelings do you get, if at all? And just observe now how strongly you're identified with this. Is it the same number 4 on 10, 5 on 10, 6 on 10? Has it increased or decreased? Now bring your attention back to your breathing and take a few breaths. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. For part 3, we're going to imagine that the thing that we are identified with doesn't exist. So, for example, if I'm identified with the team Manchester United, I need to imagine that Manchester United as a team didn't exist. Just observe how you're feeling. If I'm identified with a concept like veganism, I am going to imagine that nobody ever came up with the word and that concept didn't exist. Just notice how you're feeling. What does this thought do to your identity? Does it change your identity in any way? Do you become smaller or bigger, less or more? Or do you stay exactly the same, regardless of whether the thing you've identified with never existed in the first place? Now bring your attention back to your breathing and take a few breaths. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes if they were closed. So, thank you for doing this experiment with me. I find the relationship between us and the things that we identify with truly fascinating. And I love this concept because it can make us more aware and therefore enable us to act consciously and kindly whenever we wish. So, I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you next time.